I'm excited to be here today to talk about something different, something I haven't talked about in I guess since I came here at A&M, because as Fred indicated, I've started approaching this new adventure back in January when I was asked to be part of this exciting group, which is World Coffee Research. And so what, first I wanted to ask how many of you had coffee this morning? Okay, so it's good. Talking about coffee, this is always exciting because everybody can relate to, right? Everybody sooner or later has had that experience, or at least tried, or at least know what we're talking about. But I don't know how many of you this morning or just now when you're actually sipping your coffee, if you actually talked about the field, you know, that where this product is cultivated and harvested, and of course processed and dried, bagged, transported, and then of course it has to be roasted. And I wish we could actually smell that. And all the way to the final product. You know, it's a lot of work. Of course, this is not very different from any horticultural commodity that we deal with and that we consume. But one of the big differences that we have with coffee is that this can only be grown in tropical countries. So there's an additional step there that we don't have, you know, when we talk about maybe crops that can be grown right here in the United States. So that definitely adds to some of the challenges and features also about this particular crop. This is an interesting chart that I came across while I was preparing this seminar. It's almost like an organigram of all the different types of coffee that you can drink. You know, okay, so for example, this morning I had a medium roast. Okay, I used a mocha pot, and then it was actually normal. Okay, it was not, you know, too strong or bold and everything. And then I added milk, and I got my latte. Okay, so you can find your own. You know, if you have French press, if you do French press, you use this. If you do drip, you come across all the different type of coffee drinks that you can find. And of course, Starbucks is partly responsible for this because probably until about 10 years ago, well, let's say 20 years ago, there were only 2 or 3 different kinds, and now, of course, they added so many because of all the flavoring and things like that. So the structure of the seminar is we're gonna briefly talk about botany and history because I think it's important and relevant. I've learned a lot in the last few months about coffee, and I think it's nice for me to share this, especially with the graduate students or people that haven't familiarized with this crop. And then we'll talk about some of the challenges that the industry is facing, and the future of coffee as we know it. And eventually I'll tell you more about the World Coffee Research program. So coffee belongs to the Coffea genus. It's 125 species. It was 120 just a few years ago, but it was recently bumped to 125 because they've added this genus here, Silanthus, which is actually what you see here in Asia. Okay, it's a genus that was added when following some genetic analysis that indicate that indeed the two it should be included in the coffee genus. They are all diploid and allogamous. Okay, the only exception is Coffea Arabica, which is a totally different thing here. Is actually many of you probably don't know, but it's the result of a cross that occurred probably 100,000 years ago, or more or less. You know, 100,000 years more or less. So it's interesting. Okay, that's a wrap. I guess that's the screensaver. If we don't hit the. Do I have to log on again, or? Let me see. Because it thinks that we're not using it. So, thanks, Paul. scientists now believe that that actually was a single event, okay, that happened back then. Was this cross between two different Coffea species, the Coffea eugenioides and the Coffea canephora, which is actually the Robusta coffee. You've probably heard about the Robusta coffee. So you think about it, you know, we had this single event, pollination or cross between these two species, and that is because of that single event that we actually have the Arabica coffee, which is the one that we drink today. Interestingly, when that cross happened, the new species actually inherited the complete set of chromosomes from the two parents. So it's actually a species with a double set of chromosomes. It's a 44 chromosomes versus the 22 of all the other species in the genus. So, and of course, this has some consequences on the breeding program, because we are talking about a species with an additional set of chromosomes. Now I need a picture. Yes. Correct. Yes, that is true. Yes, we drink specialty coffees. The one that's considered the good quality is Arabica, and but at the same time, Robusta has a very important role in the industry, because that is, for example, where all the instant coffee comes from. Also, coffee that are a little bit more like for mass production, you know, not necessarily for the quality. Okay, but it is definitely it plays a significant role, especially for certain countries like Brazil or producing countries in Asia. Okay, Central America is mainly dedicated to the Arabica production, but Robusta is definitely important as well. So I was talking about this cross between the canephora and the eugenioides and with the Arabica. That was the product of this cross. Where did this happen? This happened in Ethiopia, or at least this part of the world, which is not necessarily Ethiopia, but neighboring countries as well. We're in the eastern part of Africa. Okay, this is the highlands of Ethiopia, and this is where the Arabica and most of the Coffea species are from. Ethiopia is still considered the place where some of the best coffee in the world comes from. Ethiopia is also still the fifth largest producer of coffee in the world, and coffee exports actually account for about 33% of all the exports of Ethiopia. Okay, so that's definitely a significant component of the economy of this country. And now, how did coffee go from the highlands of Ethiopia to the rest of the world, actually to our styrofoam cups right here? That's pretty sad way to put it. So we started again in Ethiopia, and you know, you've probably heard about the legend of the shepherd that was there with this herd of goats, and one day he saw some of these goats jumping and getting all excited, and basically they wouldn't rest, and so he didn't understand what was going on, and then he observed those goats again, and then he saw that they were actually eating those berries right there, and then he, you know, harvest them, and then, you know, eventually he shared them with I think a monk or something. They roasted them, and eventually they realized that, you know, that all that excitement came from the berries. It's a legend, but the Ethiopians actually really, you know, believe, and they're proud of telling the story and how the coffee, you know, was eventually known. But so Ethiopia, when coffee left Ethiopia, the first place that it went to is Yemen. Okay, Yemen is right across from the Gulf, and this probably happened sometime. We don't really know, but sometimes between 700-800 AD through the 1500, you know, sometime in that time range. And it stayed there for a while, and it wasn't really until the Europeans arrived that they discovered this drink, and they started, you know, distributing around the world. And before the European, actually, it was the Turks that got there, and they were very jealous of and controlling the export of coffee from Yemen, to the point that they would boil or slightly roast all the seeds before exporting them, to make sure that you know, the seeds were not grown, cultivated. But of course, you know, if there's a will, there's a way. Eventually, some of these seeds did escape Yemen, and what happened is that the Dutch, who were already a big, and we're talking about the late 1500 now, early 1600, the Dutch were already here, you know, controlling trades. They actually brought some of those seeds to Ceylon first, and then to Java, Indonesia, and that's one of the reasons why we refer to it as Java, as cup of Java. Okay, not because coffee is from that part of the world, but because it's one of the first places where it was brought and cultivated successfully. So this is very important to point out, because while the Dutch brought coffee to Java, the French actually brought it to the Isle of Réunion, which is actually, back then it was called Bourbon, named after the Bourbon family, of course, which was one of the royal family of France. And that's actually where it was cultivated. It's important to look at these two different routes, because those two places actually gave rise to the two main, let's call them families, okay, which is not really in a botanical way, but let's say groups of varieties, which gave rise to most of the modern varieties. And from here, it's important to see how from Java, the coffee was actually brought back to the Netherlands, okay, where it was grown in the botanical gardens, and then it made its way to France, and from there it reached the Isle of Martinique, okay, which is the first place in the Americas, one of the first places where it was actually cultivated, actually the first place. We're now in 1720. On the other side, the coffee from the Isle of Bourbon or Réunion is the one that was brought to South America, to Brazil in particular, and that is why today some of the most important varieties that are grown in Brazil actually are in the Bourbon group, okay? And so it's, again, it's very important, especially for breeders, because of course these two different groups have distinct characteristics. This particular route, the one that went from France to Martinique, as I mentioned, was 1720. There was this Navy officer that was being reassigned to Martinique. His name was Gabriel Mathieu de Clou. And when he found out that he was going to be assigned there, he purchased a coffee plant from I guess the botanical garden, and brought it all the way to Martinique. This was not an easy task, because imagine, you know, traveling sailing on the ocean for all those years, for actually months and months, and trying to tender a coffee plant. He had a glass, little cage, mini greenhouse that he had built. And of course they had pirates, you know, they tried to attack him, and then they had several storms, and his own crew actually got pretty mad because he would actually use fresh water to water the coffee plant, you know, instead of, you know, using it for the people. But nonetheless, that plant made it. One single plant made it to Martinique, and it was successfully planted, and about 4 years later it produced the first seeds. And guess what? 70 years later, they estimate that Martinique had between 18 and 19 million coffee plants grown from that single plant. Now, this is important to understand, because it tells you something about the genetic variability of the cultivated coffee. This is one of the examples, one of the few examples, because also those few seeds that reached Java, that reached Bourbon, was just a handful of seeds. Okay, so I'll tell a little bit more about the narrow genetic variability that we have in the cultivated coffee, which is one of the problems that we have today. This is another interesting chart that shows those different groups, as I was telling you. The Bourbon group, okay, the one that was, of course, grown in Isle of Bourbon. The Typica is the one that was grown in Java. Okay, that's what the breeders call it, the Typica group. There's also another branch here, which is actually the results of a hybridization between a Robusta plant and an Arabica. And that happened in the Isle of Timor in Indonesia, and so that group is called the Timor hybrids. Okay, that's another. And then we have the green branch right here represents those varieties that actually were collected back from Ethiopia. So back at the source. Okay, they are also used for breeding purposes because they kind of reintroduce some of the lost genes. Let's say that. This is a diagram that kind of summarizes that. I know it's a little hard to read, but basically you can see here that's Ethiopia right here. Okay, first we go in Yemen. Remember, that was the first place that the coffee was brought to, and then we have the Typica and the Bourbon. Okay, and then from there, eventually breeders try to cross, okay, back some of these groups to other provenances collected from other places, and also cross it back with the Robusta. So here's some of the dates. 1585 is when. Actually, how did coffee made it to Europe? This is what this is about. Because yes, I told you that the Dutch first, brought it back to the Netherlands, but that was a little bit later in the history. 1585 is the first date that we have, and that's when the Venetians, who were great traders and merchants, they actually described the use of coffee in Turkey. Okay, so by this date, Turkey was already making quite a large use of coffee. And then the first coffee shop opened in Venice, first European coffee shop opened in Venice in 1638. And 1688, the Lloyd's coffee shop opened. Most of you probably didn't know that the Lloyd's, the famous insurance group in London, actually opened as a coffee shop. But because it was a place where a lot of merchants and ship owners would hang out, I mean, the owner started thinking, maybe I can offer more than coffee. Okay, and then he started actually offering, insurance, and so that's how it started. And one of the oldest coffee shops still operating today is actually in Venice. It's called Café Florian, and it's been open continuously since 1720. Okay, which is the same year that the Navy officer sailed from France to Martinique. Okay, so just a drink. Yeah, I will ask you to think twice because actually it's estimated that 2.25 billion cups are drank every day in the world. Okay, 11 million hectares are cultivated to coffee in the world. 25 million is the estimated number of farmers that depend on coffee, which brings to about, that was fast, brings to several hundred million people that depend on coffee, whether they grow it, whether they trade it, whether they roast it, market for their livelihood. So a lot of people employed. Many developing countries, those are, of course, in tropical areas, actually depend on on coffee, and some up to 50% of their export is based on coffee. It is said that is the second most important traded commodity after oil in the world. So the future of Arabica coffee. I already mentioned some of the issues here, okay? But one of the big issues is that it's a very climate-sensitive species. It's very picky. It grows only in a certain altitude range. I'm talking about the Arabica, between about 1,000 and 2,000 meters in height. Okay, and with ideal temperature between mean temperature between 18 and 21 Celsius. So you understand that's very narrow right there. There's not many places around the world where you can find these conditions. So it is actually considered vulnerable to extinction. But if you add to the fact that most of this, the native area where the Arabica plants are grown is actually also subjected to deforestation, because of course it's a developing country, then you pretty much we're talking about an endangered species, okay? Because we're losing because of deforestation and a lot of the areas where the last wild coffee plants are grown. So I mentioned temperature, and so what are the effect that temperature has on coffee? It definitely increases the quality, increases the flavor. I'm sorry, it decreases the quality, decreases the flavor, and also decreases the yield. Also, it makes the plants more susceptible to diseases and insects. So definitely, it's not ideal. Even just a few degrees, 1-2 degrees higher than the ideal range is actually not good for the production. This is a paper that was published in 2012 and that made a lot of headlines. This was conducted by Aaron Davis, who is one of the scientists at the Kew Gardens, the Royal Kew Gardens in London. He ran a lot of numbers and also using climatic modeling. And basically, he developed 3 different scenarios. I'm not going to go through the differences, but you can look at either one. Actually, all of them, it doesn't matter. You can see that this is the year 2000, 2020, 2050, and 2080. It shows it predicts, okay, the distribution of the Arabica coffee in optimal land, in optimal condition, intermediate or marginal conditions. This is, of course, if we look at the trend for climate change. You know, if we continue in the direction where we're going with the temperature rising and everything, this is what's going to do to the Arabica. Okay, it's pretty much going to almost disappear in about less than 100 years. This is similar numbers on Nicaragua. Okay, you can see how the distribution is going to decrease, and also the quality. Okay, the places, the land where the good coffee can be grown is actually going to shrink sensitively in just a few decades. Now, this is one big problem that the industry is facing, even though, you know, it's less tangible because, oh yeah, climate change is one of those things, you know. But there are definitely a lot of problems that the industry is facing. And of course, I put coffee rust right there at the top because this is one of the topics that I'll be talking about. That's one of the topics that we're involved with. Here's the rust. Rust is a fungus, of course, which was first discovered in 1861 near Lake Victoria, which is part of the native distribution where coffee is native there. And just a few years later, we don't really know how, but it was found in the island of Ceylon, now of course Sri Lanka, and that was not good because that island was already pretty much completely cultivated with coffee. The British controlled Ceylon, and they had they were extensively cultivating. It took just a couple of seasons for the fungus to completely wipe out the production, and this is one of the reasons why actually Ceylon is known for the tea instead of for the coffee. Okay, and also one of the reasons why the British, you know, drink a lot more tea, or at least are known to drink more tea than coffee, because they pretty much all their supplies went down. From Ceylon, it took a while for the fungus to actually reach America, but eventually it did. There was, as soon as coffee people realized the severity of this problem, the threat, they put quarantine programs in place, which worked for about 100 years, okay, until 1970. It's when the coffee rust arrived in Brazil through some infected material, most likely, and then seed plants from Africa during 1970, and then from there it moved all the way up to Central America, where it's still a big problem. Okay, the only place in the world where coffee rust hasn't arrived is Hawaii. Okay, and of course they are being very careful, making sure they do not import any coffee from other places, because it is a big problem. So what does rust do to the coffee? The coffee and Arabica particularly, the other species are infected as well. They are obligate host for the fungus, so there's no other intermediate alternative host. So of course, it's one of those fungus where you cannot really break the cycle, because it just all revolves around the coffee plant, infects the leaves, infects the spores, infect the leaves through the stomata, okay, and then also they use the stomata to produce their spores, okay, and so and that causes the leaves to fall, and of course infected leaves stay on the ground, and when the splashing water and winds and everything, you know, the cycle continues and propagates. I'll show this little videos. The A&M. Oops. Let me see if I can click that. What does it look like? It doesn't go. It's an image, actually. Never mind. Yeah, I can do that. I copied from another slide and it copied as an image instead of as a... $10.94.94. Oh, come on. I'm going to lose it again. 811. So A&M asked us to do this video.
Coffee rust is a fungus. It's a disease that is a big threat for the coffee plants and for the coffee industry in general. There's about 400,000 producers that are affected by the rust crisis in Central. No longer able to feed their families properly. A coffee leaf infected with a fungus that produces millions of spores, which are propagated by mainly through splashing water. Once the spore gets on a leaf, it invades through the stomata of that leaf, and the leaves die off, rendering the plant fruitless. The relationship between temperature, between humidity and rust is not very well known, but we know that there is a correlation. It's clear. Climate change has been a major factor here in the recent rust crisis, because earlier, as you went up the slope into the higher altitudes, the fungus could not survive. What happened in 2012 was that suddenly the warmer temperatures climbed up the mountain, and the rust came with it and destroyed the crops at the higher altitude, which is the premium crop. The major objective is to create high-yielding, resistant, high-quality varieties for the Central American countries that have been so affected by the rust fungus. This is something that's been done successfully in many other crops, breeding for resistant varieties.
The research that we're doing in this project is really one component of a much, much larger program. And so we at the Borlaug Institute for International Agriculture are helping to make sure that these coffee farmers have their livelihoods protected, and certainly because they are so important to this region because they produce this quality coffee that we all enjoy.
So you've seen this picture. This is what a lot of the coffee plantations looked like in 2012, because this is what happened just 2-3 years ago. There was a new wave of rust that hit Central America. Rust never went away since the 70s when it first arrived. It never left Central America, clearly, but somehow it was kept under control. Somehow the climatic conditions were not so favorable. So there was a perfect storm of events in 2012 to the point that it severely hit some of these countries. And here are some numbers. You see these are 4 of the Central American countries that produce coffee. We have El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Guatemala, and it shows an estimate number of workers displaced, because remember that a lot of the farmers rely entirely on coffee, whether they grow it or whether they harvest. You have this migrant families, literally families, they move from farm to farm just to harvest coffee, starting from lower altitudes all the way to the higher altitudes, and then moving from different countries as of course harvest begins. So you can see that the numbers, up to 100,000 people in Honduras, and this is the income loss, okay, in million dollars, estimated over $100 million lost because of the rust in 2012, 2013. This is an estimated number for the following year, okay, last year, so the numbers didn't look any better. Actually, they looked a lot worse. More and more people displaced, and we're now talking about over $200 million lost because of this. I've asked around. We don't have the new numbers yet. In some places like Guatemala, the situation looks a little bit better because, of course, there's been some intervention. Farmers are advised to treat. Some of the most progressive farmers, those that actually can afford, have started replacing some of the old varieties. They're susceptible with a new one. So some, as I say, it looks a little bit better. Here, the production they estimate for this year, but nonetheless, the situation is still serious, and the rust crisis continues. This is a picture I actually took in Guatemala last month, and literally there was a crew. This was a medium-sized owner with definitely access to chemicals, and he had a crew of about, I guess, probably 6, maybe 7 or 9 people with all their backpack sprayers, and literally fumigating the entire farm with fungicides. As you can see, that's not mist. Okay, it's actually mist, but with chemicals inside. Interestingly, the neighbor, who was a much smaller farmer with no access to capital, does not do this. And I mean, you don't need a fence to see where the property ends. I mean, One, this one, the plants look beautiful. The neighbor, I mean, they have probably 20% of the leaves that they should have. Okay, so clearly they need to treat continuously. So you've seen those numbers, the loss in revenue for a lot of these farmers, but of course you have to add also the increased cost of the chemicals and replacing the plants. So we're approaching, actually we're reaching over $1 billion in losses because of this fungus. And this is not the only problem that the industry has faced in the last few years. They had record rains in 2010 in Colombia. Of course, the rust, which still continues in Brazil. We have here a representative from Brazil, and they have experienced one of the most severe droughts ever recorded just last summer. And of course, you add other problems. This is a coffee berry borer. It's a little insect that was actually introduced from Africa. Okay, see how small it is? I mean, it looks like a watermelon here in this picture, but you've seen the size of those berries. I mean, it's what, maybe 2/3 of an inch in diameter, and it's small, but of course it feeds on the seed, and one of the problems is that they have actually done some studies and run some tests, and it looks like the development and the number of generations that this insect has is extremely dependent on temperature. Okay, to the point that they in certain parts of Ethiopia, about 30 years ago, this insect could barely do one generation, or actually was not present at all. And now in the very same areas, it can do 2 to 3 generations per year. Okay, because of the temperature increase. This is another fungus. Well, luckily, this is not present in the Americas yet. It is in Africa, still there. We hope it'll stay there, but of course, there's a lot of concern. Oh, I guess it's me. And a lot of concerns that it might actually arrive to Americas at some point. So, which is not a problem. So, the future of cultivated Arabica coffee, I already mentioned that we have a very, very low genetic diversity, mainly because of those seeds that were brought in from Ethiopia hundreds of years ago and just limited the propagation to those original seeds. And also, it's also very difficult to store. The seeds have don't last very long. They don't keep their variability for very long. So you can't really have seed banks. If you want to do studies and breeding, you have to either have germplasm of live material or collect cuttings and in vitro germplasm, which of course added to the cost. Okay, so this is basically where the genesis of world coffee research, which is very, very young, as it was mentioned earlier. Only formed only a couple of years ago in 2012, and Tim Schilling is the mastermind behind this. And I know Dr. Price was also instrumental in this, and of course Tim is still the director, executive director. Basically, exponential demand, because coffee is now more popular than ever, and is now reaching countries where coffee was not popular, like China, India. Okay, now they have their own coffee chains, and it's replacing some of the traditions that were usually linked to tea. Okay, supply side problems, I've mentioned a few, and the paucity of research. Coffee is one of those so-called orphan crops. Because even though it's the second and most important traded commodity in the world, I mean, the research behind it is very, very small compared to minor crops. I think there's more research done on pecans than there's actually in coffee. Okay, and if you look at the size of the industry, I would say that this is quite remarkable. So the mission of World Coffee Research is, I don't know if you can read it there, is to grow the Arabica coffee supply chain in a sustainable way through collaborative agriculture, research, and development. So, how can we approach this, all these problems? Okay, I've talked about the issues related to climate change and other related to diseases and genetic variability. We could either cool the planet, okay, have a little ice bath right there, or we could change the genetics. So of course we're going to opt for change the genetics. So, but before we do this, and there was a study actually who was just we just received the report 2 weeks ago that we funded. It was also to look at the world and look at the climate, and in particular to see which locations are suitable for Arabica cultivation. Okay, so we basically contracted CIAT, which is the Center, International Center for Tropical Agriculture, which is based in Cali, Colombia, but they have offices in other Latin American countries. And they started, analyzing hundreds and hundreds of data sets related to climate change. And they just gave us, as I mentioned, the report to see what's going to happen to coffee and what parts in the world can be used to grow Arabica in the years to come. And this is not opening, but I'm gonna go like this. Okay, here we go. So here are the results, and when you see here the different numbers, cluster 1, 2, 3, those are just different ecological area zones. So for example, cluster 2 is a humid, hot area, and then you have all the different, more rainy, less rainy. So it's not that relevant at this point, but just those are places where coffee can be grown. So we can start from Central America. Okay, and all here you see where coffee is grown now. Okay, and if you just look at the optimal sites, okay, you can see that these are the optimal sites where coffee Arabica can be grown. When you look at the climate data from 2050, okay, which is of course based on modeling, you can actually, oops, what did I do? So, well, let's go back to the current situation, and then I'm going to switch to 2050. I don't know if you can see the difference, but you can see definitely that it's going to shrink, right? Let's go here to Colombia and the Andes. This is 2050. I'm going to do the opposite reverse now. This is now. Okay, so again, it's going to be sensitively reduced anytime you go from the current. Let's look at Brazil. This is all part of Brazil where coffee is grown now. Okay, and this is where it's going to be grown in about 40 years from now. So again, it's going to be definitely a lot less, and for some parts of the world, this is actually a pretty significant reduction, because you see, so it's something to think about. And why is this happening? Well, clearly, you understand that coffee is grown at elevation. So if the temperature increases, it means that Arabica has to be pushed even higher. Okay, if the ideal range is now between 1,000 and 2,000 meters, it means that maybe 100 years from now we'll have to be at 1,200, 1,300 meters, 2,300. Okay, and of course there's not as much land as you go up in elevation, and some countries don't have that type of altitude to grow it. So this is one of the problems that the industry is facing. I've been talking about all this climate change and everything, but then I read this article yesterday on the editorial on the Eagle, and this gentleman, I hope he's not here, but John Hyde from Bryan, he says that he's convinced that climate change is a hoax. Okay, so I don't know, maybe I should have just canceled all the slides and just forget about it. But you know, all this information, yeah, you might say it's a little bit they just want to create sensationalism, but at the same time, it's based on current numbers. I mean, climate change is happening, whether it's man-made or you know, something natural or something cyclic, but at the same time, the numbers are there, and temperature is warmer now than it is today. Speaking of the diversity in cultivated varieties that I mentioned earlier, you know, this is some of the data, for example, from Ethiopian plants, okay, collected in Ethiopia, and this is the cultivated, okay, so it's a very small group right there. We actually estimate that only about 1% of the genetic variability that is present in the wild is currently in the cultivated Arabica variety. Okay, so it's just a small part. There's a lot, you know, out there that we could tap on. There's only one problem. Ethiopia does not allow any foreign research group to do research and actually to access their own collections in germplasm, whether it's in the wild or it is in their repository. So we cannot do that. We cannot go there and collect samples to breed, but we can do something that is, you know, close enough. And so what we have started doing, we have collected over 1,200 accessions from mainly from Katie germplasm. Katie is the Center for Agriculture, what do I say? Tropical Agriculture Education and Teaching in Costa Rica, and they have this repository where they have a lot of the last coffee plants that were actually taken out of Ethiopia in the 50s and 60s. Okay, most of the plants are still alive. They're a little old and, you know, maybe not in excellent shape, but they can be rejuvenated. What they do, they prune them periodically, and it creates new material. So we went ahead and collected all those, and they're being sequenced as we speak. Actually, they just finished. We are waiting for the results in a lab in France, and this is going to give us an idea of what we're dealing with. And what we're trying to find through this project is actually find at least you know, about 50 of these accessions that represent the widest diversity, genetic diversity that we have access to. Okay, again, we cannot go back to Ethiopia, but we have these plants that were brought in by these missions, and then so after we have that, we're going to actually try to breed with Benoit Bertrand, the person that was being interviewed in that video, with some of the best producing varieties. So basically what we're trying to do is kind of shake things up a little bit and kind of bring back a little bit of the wild genes that still, however, you know, hopefully the good ones, and kind of mix them with varieties that have a good quality, good resistance, and everything else. You know, to develop the new generations of coffee varieties. Okay. We also have something going on right now, which is a variety trial. What we have done, we have collected seeds from several countries all over the world. Of course, coffee-producing countries. We have received them here at our offices through USDA, of course. We didn't receive them here directly, so they went through regular inspections and everything, and then we shipped everything to a plant propagation lab in Florida, and they have grown these plants, and they actually propagating them via micro cuttings mainly, and they're shipping them back to all in sterile in vitro containers to all the countries. Okay, not just the ones that send us the seed, because of course we may have received a couple of varieties from Papua New Guinea, maybe 3 from Colombia, you know, but all the countries that send us the seed will receive all the varieties. So we're talking about 15 varieties, 30 varieties in about 15 countries, and all of them are actually receiving these plants as we speak. I took this picture in Honduras last month. So they're receiving, they're acclimating them right now. The purpose of this study is to have a multi-location variety trial. So we've selected this 30 best varieties from all over the world, and we're going to distribute them back to test them in sites that may be conducive to grow those particular varieties, which until now have not been grown in a specific country. Okay, they may be doing well in Colombia, but maybe not known in India. So this is a good way to understand what we have right now that the farmers can grow all over the world. And this is the list of all the countries. So 15 countries they have received, and then are receiving the plants right now. And this is the list of all the varieties. You know, Colombia 1 through 5, and then Brazil, and so forth. This is it's a project that costs about $400,000 per year for the first 3 years, and then hopefully they'll generate also a lot of information that we'll be able to advise. We have an ongoing sensory project right now to develop a lexicon and also a sensory language that can help the industry and also the scientists to evaluate these varieties in an unbiased, replicated way, because also all these varieties that are being distributed eventually will produce, and we want to make sure that we can actually evaluate the quality of the coffee in all those countries, and we do that of course in a standard way, thanks to this project right here, which has been conducted by Kansas State University, and then people here like Rhonda Miller and Chris Kirk in animal science, you know, their sensory lab here on A&M. We have many other projects going on. We have a postdoc, Gladstone Carvalho from Brazil, who is working here, and he's going to be looking at the working with David Byrne and also Brent Pemberton. We also have, I don't think Barbara is here, is she? No. We also have a visiting exchange student from Brazil, a PhD student, and they'll be looking at the physiological and molecular characterization coffee plants and the heat stress, because I mentioned the heat and drought that Brazil experienced. So definitely that's a major issue for Brazilian coffee industry. We have also an incoming PhD student who'll be working with Trish and Seth Murray over in Crop and Soil, and then we're going to look at the understanding the more about the genetics of coffee, in particular in response to yield, rust resistance, and a lot of other variables. We have Colombia sensory trials that's actually just wrapped up, comparing two of the main coffee varieties that are grown in Colombia. And then we have a lot of other things going on. We have a project which is funded through the Buffett, Howard G. Buffett Foundation and Coffee Plant Development. And they're looking at revitalizing the Eastern Congo coffee industry. It's called the Kivu Project. Kivu is the name of the region where this is happening. We are negotiating a donation from actually the Aggie Coffee Network, actually Aggie Network in El Salvador. They want to donate a farm to World Coffee Research, and it looks like it's going to happen. We'll see. We're also looking into kind of utilizing some of the space that was vacated 2 years ago at the West Laco USDA facility that was closed because we may be needing a rust screening center for world coffee for leaf rust, because the one and only that was existing in Portugal has been shut down due to the basically financial situation of the government in Portugal. So we're looking into that too. we submitted a proposal with Starbucks for about $400,000 to help farmers have access to some of the resistant varieties, because as I mentioned, even though a lot of the farmers are aware that there's alternatives out there for rust, and using some of the varieties, the hybrids that already exist, and they do not have the funding to buy this. And so we've asked the Starbucks Foundation to kind of spearhead this establishment of demonstration plots using about over 300 farmers as kind of a pilot program to plant this resistant variety. Just if you're curious about our numbers, this is as I mentioned, it's only a 2.5-year program. When the WCR was established, their initial budget was about $1 million, and now it's about 2.5. So I don't know if you can read this, but this is the industry funding. Okay, the blue here, which it's just over approximately $1 million a year. Some have already been committed for the coming fiscal years, and we have government funding mainly through grants, like the Rust GDA grant with USAID, and yeah, we're doing fine, but we need more. Okay, we want to grow, and so we're continuously pitching to coffee corporations and of course funding as well. This is research expenses by from the beginning to now, we're over $2 million a year, and these are the different projects that we're working on. The breeding and the multi-location variety trials are the ones that are going to take over most of the finances. And these are we have of course a board of directors which is formed by industry representatives. They're the ones who direct us what to do, and this is the major donors: Smuckers, Keurig, Green Mountain, Mars, and then we have all these other coffee groups, all the way down to the small roasters. We also have a voluntary checkoff program. So basically, importers, those that want to contribute, they add a half a cent per pound of imported coffee. They add it to the the cost that they pass on to the roasters, and actually some importers choose to match. So we end up getting 1 cent per pound. And that's also another way of funding.